Hi, everyone. I hope you're having some fruitful conversations. Time to wrap up. I hope you continue these conversations over the course of the training, but for now, I'm excited to introduce our final session today, which is quite a special one. So we just saw how trace data can help us in tracking plumes, and now we're going to hear how those plumes, pollution, and emissions are impacting us every day on a personal level. To discuss the intersection of health indicators in the climate crisis, please welcome former Vice President Al Gore alongside former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist from Tennessee.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I can't even begin to tell you what an honor it is to have Bill Frist on stage here. Bill, thank you, for coming.
Great to be here.
We've been friends for a long time. I'm not going to burn up too much of our time telling you the story, but when I was a young member of the House of Representatives, there was a constituent who needed a kidney transplant. One thing led to another, and I introduced legislation to create the National Organ Transplant legislation. Meanwhile, Bill Frist was establishing what is still to this day the largest heart transplant program in the entire world here in Nashville at Vanderbilt. He also established the largest lung transplant program, both here in Nashville at Vanderbilt. And I went to him for advice on writing the legislation. And it did some good. It's needed some reforms for a while. We've talked about that. But then years later, when I had gone on to the Senate, Bill called me and asked if he could come up and spend a couple of days, and we visited. And I didn't realize he was thinking about running for the Senate, but he learned a lot about what it was like to be a senator. Anyway, after he was elected, he distinguished himself, rose up to be the majority leader in the Republican-dominated Senate. Just has a sterling reputation. You all know this. Now he runs the Nature Conservancy, the largest conservation organization by far in the entire world, and introduced the NashvilleHealth program. We don't have time to get into all the details of everything Bill has done, but I do want to end with your bio by emphasizing this. When he took over the Nature Conservancy, he brought climate front and center and the nexus between climate and health and made it a part of the Nature Conservancy. And so we owe a big debt of gratitude to Bill. And thank you for all those reasons and more for being here, Bill. So
I'll have to say the Transplant Center, which is fantastic here, we were just talking about it earlier, if it weren't for a visionary who we're talking about today, obviously the biggest challenge that we have, existential, but the Transplant Center here would not be the biggest in the world in terms of hearts if it weren't for a vision in terms of how organs and tissues are distributed back before anybody had thought of it, Al Gore. It's important for you to know that. So round of applause for Transplant.
What I learned came from him, but, yeah. And we have a friend in common, Jerry Mann, whose name ought to be called out here too. Anyway, what caused you to integrate climate and health?
So the Nature Conservancy is 6,000 people, 80 countries, chapters in all of your districts. And for years and years, it's been conservation and preserving the lands and the waters for which all life depends, And we have pillars of streams and oceans and land and people. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, added climate for all the reasons that everybody in here knows we've been talking about today and some of us last.
By the way, I don't want to interrupt your narrative, but you ought to know Bill was here last evening. He has been here for every minute of this program all day long. So that's unusual for a guest speaker.
Well, 20 years from now, I want you to be telling this story. That 20 years ago, Bill Frist was right here today. But, so go with me, because you started there, to the operating room. Every day, just about every night, walking into an operating room, making an incision and opening the chest, just what you did. It can be made dramatic, which is what you do. And many times taking the lung out, putting it elsewhere and putting new in our heart. But looking at that lung, disease, shriveled, toxins, mottled with tar, mottled with cigarette smoke, sort of what the damage is called, knowing that I was going to transplant it or cut it open and remove a tumor. And it wasn't an epiphany, because you kind of overstate it if you say it's an epiphany. But asking myself, what does happen upstream? Yes, genetics is probably 30% of it, but what's the other 70%? And what we've been talking about today is the sort of force multiplier effect of climate, whether it's the heart disease or the lung disease, or when I open the coronary artery and you see all the cholesterol there, coming back to diet and food and processed food and regenerative agriculture and the health of the soil. So that kind of thinking takes you back root cause. And the root cause of coronary artery disease and damage to the endothelium and the blockage and the clotting and the heart attack and the stroke, all of a sudden you see what is the number one force multiplier, and it is the climate, all the things you talk about. So that's sort of the equivalent of the epiphany that started me on the track. And then nature was more, there's a little tiny fungus in the soil discovered in Norway about 30 years ago that allowed for the first time for me and a handful of others to do lung transplants to make it possible. So then you had nature, cyclosporin, 50% of all the cancer drugs come from nature, being united with the fact that the climate, the hotter days, the anxiety, the stress, the cortisol, the immunology, the hormones, all of that coming together. So it's a long-winded answer, but it's important because it's based on science, it's based on fact, it's based on truth. Everybody in here is going to have a disease that's climate related. You may or may not know it. Pretty powerful message for why now, not 10 years from now, why it matters for you now. So that's the thinking behind it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Now, as a doctor, and you start with your narrative in the operating room, cutting a chest open, that kind of got my attention. You said it can be made dramatic. It is dramatic as far as I'm concerned, but you have studied the negative impacts on health coming from pollution fairly extensively. Could you give us a brief overview of some of the most significant ways that environmental pollutants harm public health and how you've seen that play out here in Nashville?
Yeah. And usually I do start with pollution, and much of today's been about pollution, and I love, the whole day's been unbelievable in terms of making it real to everybody, even all of us who already feel strongly about it coming in. Stressors of the environment broadly, now come to pollution quickly because it's the easiest to understand, hit the body. And what the body does, it takes the outside world, then that's by the air we breathe and the food we eat and the soil that we walk on and how hot it is and the anxiety around heat and hotter days, all of that gets written into the body. Written, coded into the body.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And it's coded in ways that enter, and the lung is constantly taking all this pollution into the body, and it gets written, it gets embedded, it has an impact. 3 ways. Number one, this is a little bit too much, but you did a little of this morning.
Yeah,
it got a little bit complicated, but it's important to know that the science is so clear. And it's behind physiology, it's biology. So I don't see the environment so much as an environmental metric. I really do see it as a biological or physiological behavior. But what happens, number one, it comes in, you get cortisol, any kind of environmental stressor. The adrenal hypothalamic axis, it doesn't matter, but your cortisol goes up. That's the stress hormone. It's good if you're running from a tiger, but if it happens all the time, chronic stress, chronic cortisol, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, puts pressure on your vessels, have a heart attack, have stroke. That's one axis. Second axis, that all stressors, pollution included, hit is what's called the autonomic, sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic is sort of fight or flight. parasympathetic, the balancing act is repair, restore, heal. When you go into nature, you have that sort of feeling. And the third category is the hormonal response, and that's inflammation and the hormonal immunology response. So I think of it inflammation and immunology. And with that, that is the sort of response that if you have a stress coming in, there's chronic activation of your immune system, which gets depressed, which makes you susceptible to all sorts of disease, which all of us know. We get a viral illness, we get sick, and we tend to get a bacterial illness. So those are the three things. So pollution, out floating around, the fumes that you have, unbelievable.
Those plumes, yeah.
Unbelievable. Just waving there, you see it visually. I take that, I see it, I take it directly to coming into my mouth or my nose and to the back, maybe a little bit of irritation down to the windpipe, down to the bronchus where it actually splits, on out to the alveoli at the end, damaging along the way this little particulate matter, PM 2.5, doesn't matter, particulate matter 2.5 is the size. It goes all the way down, damaging along the way, laying tar in there. Remember that lung that I'm looking at on the outside, and it's tar covered on the outside, it begins to shrivel. And then it hits the alveoli themselves, little sacs that is the size of probably in each person about half of this room if you laid the surface area of these little sacs. And there's pretty neat, like a tennis court or 2 tennis courts in each person. But there it goes into the bloodstream. And so all of a sudden, all the pollution out there is going all the way through, damaging along the way, activating those 3 systems, gets into the blood, and where does it go? The brain, the heart, the kidneys, the adrenal glands, the liver, the pancreas, having a impact with stress hormone, cortisol, sympathetic system, heart rate going up, blood pressure going up, chronic inflammation and immunology throughout. And the impact on that is disease. The 2 fields I do, heart and lung, heart transplants, lung transplants, backing them out upstream, that little particulate matter is what causes the disease. It's causal. It's causal in terms of being an amplifier of all the other stress that's out there. And so that's it. And now I'll stop with that because all of a sudden this stuff's real. Everything you've talked about today, when you see all of it through the lens of health and healing, and then do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath. But if you look at everything there, and I mentioned it just a second ago, it's why it matters to you, and 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 your loved one and your kids today. It matters today, because that's what's happening, the cumulative effect. And so I add that in, and then all of a sudden, a lot of this, on the political world, where it does get, as we talked about in 2 panels ago, or the 2 discussions ago, where it no longer is ideological, it can be, no longer is it political, but it really is biological, physiological. And instead of driving people out, when you're talking politics, in the world that we were in, it pulls people in because you're talking health, and health matters to every single person today.
That was an amazing overview of the health cascade of consequences. Wow, wasn't that something? I learned a lot. Thank you. Wow, that was really.
You want to take it another layer down? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean,
I know you are, but that's not that.
Well, you mentioned we both are from the political. We had a previous lifetime in politics. We're both recovering politicians, you could say. Yeah. And by the way, our fathers were close friends.
That's exactly right.
Back in
Here
the day.
Nashville.
Tom Frist Sr. and my father were really close. But as recovering politicians, I think we both realize that reaching and engaging diverse audiences and trying to build support for a difficult challenge that has to be accomplished, like the climate crisis, is very difficult. And what has your experience been in trying to communicate effectively on the climate issue with diverse audiences, including some people who are not necessarily prone to be all that interested in it?
I think it's a great question, and the audiences I travel in now, because we're in 80 countries, there's a lot globally, as you do, and then a lot in this country because we have so many chapters here, and we have 1 million members here just in this country coming on. I guess it's most dramatic for me when I go testify in the United States Senate, and I will sort of raise my hand and say, sure, I'll go testify. I'll jump into the lion's den. of a really politicized place now, so partisan, nobody's talking it like they did in your days or even my days. I was there from 1995 to 2007. And we would still travel together, Democrats and Republicans, and talk together. And when you're talking and having a conversation, I don't care how ideological people are, you end up sort of coming to common ground. So, and you talked about that a little bit yesterday in terms of that loss, but that can get better. But that's sort of another topic. So I generally will start with if I know the audience, if I'm testifying and I've got 10 Republicans over here and 10 Democrats there. You've been on that side too. Some. Did you ever testify after you left?
Yeah.
You had to, I guess, for something. And then I would start with health. I would start with the common denominator and then walk through. I wouldn't go to the kind of science that is there. Today it's a little bit harder because you have all of the misinformation that is out there today. But I will start with that common ground, getting the conversation going, and letting people sort of see where they're actually settling, and then move into the more sort of facts, and this is the direction that we're going in, and if we go in this direction, this is the tipping point that we're going to hit.
So you mentioned disinformation. We have a tsunami of disinformation and misinformation, misleading information on the climate crisis and even on the solutions. Most of it financed by the fossil fuel industry, and not everybody in the fossil fuel industry, but some of the most greedy and irresponsible members of it. What have you found any ways to counteract this flood of misinformation?
It's challenging, but misinformation clicks and connects. It's going to be out there because people are throwing the balls in the air all the time. With social media, but across the board, people are, because of sort of the more populist movement, not just in the United States, but around the world. And misinformation only settles in a vacuum. And that's really why what everybody, the 700 people, however many is here, is really important to be here and to have sessions like the one, again, 2 or 3 ago, of how you communicate, how you do advocate itself. But if you don't do it, and how you ended your talk, I guess, this morning, it takes action, not just vision, not just strategy, but it takes the action and filling that vacuum. And filling it, now I fill it with science, as you do, but it depends on who the audience is, because there's a huge distrust of science today, and distrust of Congress, but there's not necessarily a distrust yet of physicians, of doctors. And then if you look at the communications world around climate, first responders, this was all done right 2 years after COVID, but would be first responders, be still healthcare nurses and doctors, because there was trust there still. It would be, number 2 was first responders, number 2 would be first responders, and then number 3 would be meteorologists as the trusted source. So if you get the message right, then you need the trusted messenger, and all of you have to be trusted messengers. So you have to self-examine, what aspect of you has the trust. But if you get the message, which I base on science, and number 2, the trusted messenger, if you can get those 2 right, there's no question that you can fill the vacuum, that the misinformation is going to be out there, but it'll just bounce off.
Yeah. You talked about the changes in bipartisanship in my day and in your day as well. You left in 2007 to come back here. I left before that involuntarily.
The great thing about pledging, you're only going to serve 12 years in the Senate. When the 12 years comes up, you can say goodbye.
Okay. Well, anyway, the 2010 decision, Citizens United, really accelerated the movement toward a much more partisan lineup in Washington. And when special interests and businesses can give unlimited amounts anonymously to any candidate or politician without anybody knowing about it, wow, that really changed things. We've talked backstage, and you and I disagreed on a bunch of things, as Democrats and Republicans do, but we've agreed on far more than we've ever disagreed on. And it's always been congenial. We've always been able to work together and enjoy the working together. How do you, as a former Republican majority leader of the Senate, view the changes, really in both parties, but it's not symmetrical. Maybe you disagree, but I've seen more changes in the Republican Party. And I'm just curious how you see how this has evolved.
Yeah, I think this is sort of a much bigger question, and then we'll come back to sort of current affairs. I think money coming in, to the extent it has clearly bent the system where a handful of people, no matter who they are or which party is, because as you said yesterday, it can be on the Democrat side or the Republican side, but you're giving an unacceptable voice to one or two people. It may be 50 people, maybe 100, maybe 1,000 people. And they are, and that's just dangerous. And that's why every time something comes up, again on the slides about voting and engaging, is so important. So important. These midterm elections, I think, are so important. So important coming in, and that's where the engagement is. So I think the money is a challenge, but we shouldn't oversimplify that, because if the money is pulled out of it totally, we still, I think, have the challenge. And it comes back to what we were talking about before. It comes back to trust. It comes back to leadership. It comes back to civility and treatment with respect. Again, coming back to the communication slides earlier. And that can be reversed. I mean, I really fundamentally, I think you're pretty optimistic. We have huge challenges, but optimistic about the trajectory of where we are here. I think we can actually reverse that. Now, currently, when you sitting right there with everybody, table 15 over there this morning, when you go through the list, and you covered so much this morning in such a great way, but when you go through the list of what's happened in the last 18 months, I appreciate the way you do it, but it just kills me. It's against everything that I believe in terms of nature, of conservation, of who we are as people today, of what this country was founded on, when it comes to the issues that we're talking about today. So and that's politically just where I am, put parties aside coming in. It's where I've consistently been, but clearly things have moved in a different direction now.
Yeah.
And so every time one of those check marks come off of some environmental progress having been made, being withdrawn or put aside or undercut to me, I see it translated directly to destruction of human health, of a disease, of more people dying, of more people suffering, of a lower quality of life, of more mental health problems, more physical health problems. So now I'm a little bit unusual, because otherwise I'd get categorized as a former Republican majority leader. And the reason I now chair the largest conservation group in the world today, I think, is that kind of thinking, which is kind of neutral in terms of politics, but it's not neutral in terms of ethics, morality, caring about the individual, giving everybody the opportunity to succeed. And so, again, and for me, what's good about that is that people know what I feel, and equity and justice and all of the issues of vulnerable populations is what I put out front. But with that, people have chosen me initially to be Majority Leader of the United States Senate, which you probably wouldn't expect necessarily at that, and then working my way through the Nature Conservancy as chairman of the Conservation Group. The TNC, Nature Conservancy, has two priorities: biodiversity loss, and which is sort of big. I think in the conference we probably could emphasize that a little bit more here.
I agree.
But that's not where you've come from necessarily. But I think when John Doerr, in his top 6, he puts nature in there. And I'd cover that a little bit more. 30% of all the human-created emissions are absorbed by the land that we have in the trees. So when you have that big red thing going up there, I thought it was going to be like last night. You were going to start climbing up the big red bar, and then how much carbon capture is doing down here in technology. I wanted you to say, well, but 30% of that is captured by the land and nature and biodiversity. And once you wreck biodiversity, it won't capture it. It doesn't. And then another 30% is in the oceans, which we talked about a little bit today. And therefore, we need to care for our oceans, because for health today, not 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but for today, it does. We can't keep forcing that CO2 up with the blanket around the earth. So anyway, I'll just throw that in.
can't keep using that thin blue shell as an open sewer. And nature-based carbon removal is a phrase you don't hear, but it is a thing that we should be talking about, because one of the last slides I showed in the long slideshow emphasized the fact that if we get to net zero and stop adding to the overall total amount, then the temperature will stop going up immediately, a 3 to 5 year lag. And then if we stay there, half of the anthropogenic CO2 will have fallen out of the atmosphere in as little as 30 years.
Yeah.
So just not doing harm is one of the principal ways to heal this whole.
That's right. I like the medical thing. Do no harm. Hippocratic oath. You're getting there.
I was hoping you'd pick that up.
I picked it up.
And I was thinking
you're right. I love that slide too, because it hits it.
Thank you. And I was sitting here thinking also about your beautiful and meaningful explanation of how the pollution in the air comes down through the lung and I can't even remember the terms, but going down to all parts of, what's the
alveoli.
Alveola. So it reminded me, Bill, of an experience I had when I was in the Congress studying about the climate issue. I went to Antarctica and I went to the South Pole, and while I was down there, I went to one of the most important research sites where they drill way down in the ice. You know, it's almost 2 miles thick at parts there. And they bring the ice cores up and they can measure the amount of CO2 year by year. And they have a clever way of accurately measuring what the temperature was, different isotopes of oxygen depending on the temperature. But in more recent decades, one thing that really startled me, and when you were talking about seeing the tar accumulating in the lungs, it startled me when they went through the 1970s, they pulled up these ice cores and they said, right here is where the US Congress passed the Clean Air Act. And I tell you, it was dark below that and much lighter above that. And so the same consequences of all this pollution using the sky as an open sewer, the same consequences that gave you a kind of an epiphany when you saw it gathered in the lungs of your patients, was the same pollution that gave me a different kind of insight in seeing how even as far away as you can get on this planet from the US down at the South Pole, there you can see it accumulating there as well. So here we are, 8.3 billion people using these powerful technologies our grandparents couldn't have imagined, fueled 80% by this dirty fossil fuel complex, and we're just killing the prospects for health and prosperity. We can change it, and we've got to, but golly days, I want to ask you if you could give a charge to action to all these folks that have been here. I'll wait on that. I want to close with that and ask you to be thinking about it. But if you could change one thing about our political system right now, what would you recommend?
Yeah, no, you like the elections? No, I think the money which you've come to and sort of driven home is important. I'm not sure how you change that right now. So as we talk about, we leave here or leave tomorrow, and we all going to make our list of these are things we got to do, we got to act on. I'd say the money thing. I think how elections are held today, we're going through the primary season now, or we'll shortly here coming in. Only about 15% of the electorate today participates, of the voting, people who are voting. It depends on where you are, but 15 to 20%, but here probably 15% of people participate in the primaries. The primaries, because of, especially in the congressional seats, but still even the general elections, primaries end up determining the general election today. Different than 50 years ago coming in. And that's why this gerrymandering.
Although 50 years ago this year, I won the Democratic primary for House Representatives in the old 4th District, and there was no Republican running that year. So that primary,
It did.
things have changed. But
Yeah,
go
but,
ahead.
but still, the whole point is, the primary determines the general election. If you only have 15% of people voting, who is going to come out if you're only one out of 6, 7, 8, or 9 people? It tends to be the most rabid, the most extreme sort of people that are there. So you've got the most extreme people, and it's not everybody voting. It's not 50% of people voting. It's not 70 or 80%. It's 15%, are determining the ultimate, not just the primary, but the general election. So almost by definition, it's going to get away from sort of the origin of Howard Baker or Al Gore or
Bill Frist.
Me or Lamar. Even it's just going to get away from that overall. So I think the structure and the primary system will probably stay around for a while, but how we reform the primary system, and in the meantime, get people to vote earlier on. So that's more structural than, but it's something we can change today, where the money getting out of it's going to be hard to change.
Yeah, it will. I sometimes ask people a trick question. If you think of Jimmy Carter running for re-election in 1980 against Ronald Reagan, consequential campaign, I sometimes ask people, I'm not going to ask you, but how much money did the two of them together raise in that race? And it's a trick question because the answer is zero. Because in the post-Watergate years, there were reforms, some of which didn't last very long, but one of them was to provide full public financing for presidential candidates who met certain criteria, in return for which they would agree not to raise any private contributions. And so the quid pro quo arrangement passed muster with the First Amendment protection of money as speech. And I've always thought we could go back to that, but of course politically it's almost impossible. But I want to leave the area of politics, and I have two more questions. And the first, I want to bring you back home here to Nashville, because in addition to all these other things, you also created the NashvilleHealth initiative here in this city. And I'm interested in what you have seen in terms of climate impacts here in Nashville.
Yeah, really interesting, and the mayor today opened and mentioned several things coming in. Nashville is really interesting. The city is exploding. How many people, this is their first trip to Nashville? So a lot, probably half of the people here. It's really an interesting city. It's an ecosystem, and things are really happening here. The restaurants are great, and we've got good museums, and we've got good sports teams, and we've got good education, which K through 12 education.
Axe throwing, hot tubs, honky-tonk theme park.
That's right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Probably more whiskey sold than any city in America coming in. But with that, and people are getting jobs, and there's a lot of economic growth, it's really ironic that compared to Charlotte or Austin or Fort Worth, the cities are competitive cities in terms of bringing business and that sort of thing here. If you look at chronic disease like heart disease, lung disease, we've got more of it. If you look at infant mortality, we're actually higher than those other cities.
Oh, no kidding.
And this is Davidson County metro sort of area. If you go outside that, things change a little bit, but compared to these other cities, if you look at infant mortality, we're higher. If you look at chronic disease, we're higher. If you look at obesity, we're higher. More people are smoking here. And the mental health days, and this is huge in climate change, and I probably would have stuck more of that in today as well, because the mental health impact of climate change in terms of anxiety and...
Oh, I think it's huge.
Huge. It's unbelievable. But it's worse in Nashville than elsewhere. So we started a thing called NashvilleHealth to figure out why. And the why of that, one of the pillars really does come back. It wasn't initially come back to put in climate change. Why? Because the infant mortality, and some of the data presented earlier showed it, but infant mortality is affected if births are given on hotter days, or days with unstable weather patterns.
Right.
All of that is impacted. Chronic disease, we've talked about that. Heart disease, lung disease itself, the force multiplier being climate change, it is worse in Nashville, not because the weather is worse, but because we're not addressing it. Then you look at, and you can do that on down the line with the others that I mentioned to you. So that's what NashvilleHealth does, and that's what we've learned today, and that's why we've adopted climate change. And then we work very closely with the mayor It's all about partnership
Yeah.
coming in. It's about people. It's about place, which we talk about place. It's about protecting the good things. And then it's about partnerships. So we partner with NashvilleHealth, partners with our mayor, and we have a very specific campaign looking at hypertension, how climate, how the sense of zip codes affects hypertension. And then the mayor, in his first transportation bill that passed, I've forgotten whether he mentioned it today, did things like bus stops, sort of the greenery there to keep the heat down, synchronize the stoplights, which cuts pollution by about 15%, because if you got cars sitting there in a disconnected stoplights, all of a sudden these cars are just putting out pollution all day. That kind of partnership that NashvilleHealth can do with our government, with the NGOs, both for-profit, sort of outside of government, as well as for-profit, together is making progress.
Yeah.
We don't have all the answers yet, but that kind of collaborative collective, I would encourage everybody in here to look in your cities locally and not just think about the big, world, but starting right here in your neighborhood.
Yeah. One of the slides I showed earlier, you mentioned hypertension as a problem in Nashville.
Yep.
Same as blood pressure, high blood pressure,
yeah,
right?
but high blood
so it was interesting to me that they've now found that breathing in air pollution while a woman is pregnant increases the blood pressure of the baby that's born from that pregnancy. Another finding that's been really building strongly over the years, and it's related to Nature Conservancy, is they now know beyond a doubt that we are healthier as human beings if we spend more time in nature and unplug.
But do you know why?
What? No, tell me.
No, it's because this is, I know we're over time, but this is pretty good. It's pretty cool because it comes back to science. We all feel good when we're out in nature. And during COVID, when we were so isolated, disconnected, just walk in nature, we would feel it. And that's the sympathetic, parasympathetic system, restoring and healing, parasympathetic, parasympathetic. So there are chemical reasons that is the case. But really, is nature medicine? Is there something behind that? So in Louisville, about 3 hours from here, Louisville, Kentucky, planted 8,000 trees in a socio-economic challenge region, 8,000 trees here, did not plant them here, had the National Institutes of Health design the trial, and the result 4 years later is inflammation that's measured by C-reactive protein in those people who lived in the neighborhood with trees versus not trees was lower by 15%.
15%.
And C-reactive protein measures chronic inflammation in the bottle, which is correlated with, not necessarily causal, but correlated with stroke, hypertension, cardiovascular death, and cancer itself. So what that demonstrates is that trees really are medicine. Nature is medicine. Why? Not just because they make things a little cooler, climate change, not just because they absorb pollution, each leaf does, it depends on what kind of trees you plant, but because it does affect inflammation and immunology, your parasympathetic, sympathetic system, and your cortisol stress system. So that's what's behind it. That's why you feel good. And there's a reason for it, is the body tells you.
Well, I knew I would learn a lot from you,
yes,
you
indeed.
here. I did not know that, Bill. I cite the statistics and don't even know what's
You better have 3 slides
there
next
you
year
go.
up there.
There you go. So I only have one more question for you, but before I ask it, I just want to say it's a great honor to have you here, Bill. I think it may be gilding the lily a little bit, but I really do believe you're a national treasure. After serving as a pioneering transplant surgeon, setting up the largest program in the world, serving as majority leader in the Senate, now running the largest conservation program ever, and along the way creating NashvilleHealth. And we're fortunate to have you here in Nashville and in the United States of America and in our world. So I really appreciate it. But let me ask you one final question. These people, you've been at table 15, you have experienced this. When they leave here tomorrow at the end of this session, this event, if you had one bit of advice for them on how to be the most effective advocate for the changes we need to save the climate balance and promote this future of cleanliness and health and prosperity, do you have one bit of advice on advocacy?
I'll tell you what I do, and I would encourage everybody just to think of it this way. It's not going to be what you use. Number one, start the conversation. The 5 million people around is really great, but that should be 50 million people. And part of it is advocacy, but how do you do that? And it's really when you go home, whether it's with family or community or at work, start the conversation. And this group, it's natural, you're gonna do it. But you're a typical person scared to death to talk of it. Why? Because of the weaponization on both sides, and it's been pushed to the extremes, and it's politicized, and people get upset quickly. And start the conversation, and then let it flow. I like to lead with kind of the 20 different things that you said, you know, we're making progress, and then come, because people like solutions that will only be given hope. So I get that in the first 2 or 3 minutes after the conversation. And that kind of messaging, everybody's kind of sitting down and figuring out how to message it. And then the third thing I think is and this comes from being a doctor, just talking to thousands and thousands of patients, from the empathy end of things, recognize we all have to have humility. That as right as we might think we are, you know, it's one of the reasons science got into a problem in optics. Science isn't necessarily truth all the time. It's the best you can do at a point in time. And to have humility, not to say that you're wrong necessarily, but to do what Howard Baker told me when I became majority leader, and he's kind of famous for saying it, he said, you know, always assume that the other person just might occasionally be right. and I never start that way. So I have to remind myself, 1, 2, start the conversation and lead with some of the good news, and then hit. And then number 3, have a lot of humility at it.
I would add, first seek to understand where they're coming from, from. Well, Bill, I cannot thank you enough, and I want to ask this entire audience to join me in thanking Bill Frist for being such a highlight. Thank you so much, Bill. Wow.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.